This is a re-upload due to monetization issues, and also because I need an extra day or two for the next new episode, because my mouth is filled with blisters. No, I don't have the herpes, and I didn't chew on razor blades, but apparently when I eat something that doesn't agree with me, my mouth breaks out with painful canker sores. Makes it very difficult and fun to talk. I'll be back soon. Thank you for your understanding. Not often do people encounter spirits and creatures that defy our imaginations, and even rarer are those encounters that devolve into a struggle between life and death. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails. Follow me on Twitter at DarkPrevails, so more people can hear me rant about the terrible craftsmanship of modern furniture. Today's episode features attacks by the unexplained. Demons attacking and paralyzing a friend, mysterious creatures thirsty for flesh, and shadowy spirits that got only inches away from potential victims. Enjoy. Send me your scary stories of the unexplained at darkstories.org, and follow Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app, because they're way better places to listen compared to YouTube. Now, let's begin. Shadow Creature in My Closet. From Unidentified Creature. This happened between 1st and 3rd grade. Apologies because my memory really isn't the best, so bear with me. I never really speak about this with people, mainly because it feels more like a dream now. Although I've clarified with my cousin that it wasn't. When growing up, my mother and I lived in a flat for most of my childhood. It was a 2-bedroom place, within what some may call a complex of flats and houses located somewhere in El Dorado Park, South Africa. It was hard to find people who didn't know each other there. Because it was just the two of us, my mother and I each had our own rooms, even though I'd always slept in my mother's room, on a single bed she'd kept there for me. Both before as well as after the encounter, I never liked being anywhere in the house at night without my mother or someone else there. It didn't matter to me whether the lights were on or not. Whenever the sun went down, it would always feel like I was being watched. Granted, both my mother and I always wrote it off as nothing more than an overactive imagination, due to the fact that we both always watched and loved horror movies. But even so, whenever I was alone at night, the fine hairs across my entire body would always stand up, while the feeling of being watched would overpower any and everything I felt, matched only by anxiety and dread. My story takes place in my old bedroom, the place that always freaked me out the most. I don't remember what or who it was for, but my mother was throwing a party. At that point, she had basically programmed me to steer clear of any sort of adult business or conversation, for better or worse. So myself and a couple other kids were sent into the very room I feared the most, although having other kids there would help me ease most of my worries. We'd already been in there for a couple of hours, before I had the brilliant idea. I don't know why I did this, or why it even came to my mind, seeing as I don't recall encountering anything of this sort before that point. Although, as I said, my memory isn't the best. It was myself, my cousin, and a few friends of mine that lived at the flats as well. In total, there was around 5 or maybe 6 of us present. After having our fair share of fun, I had the idea of showing them the so-called monster in my closet. We all gathered by the door, closing it around halfway for us to get a view of the entire room. I stood in the corner behind everyone else with my hand on the light switch. I then turned the light off, leaving us in the dark, with just a bit of moonlight shining in through the window. This left us with just enough light to see what was going on inside. As we stood there, everything seemed normal at first, with my cousin and friends hammering me with questions as to what we were doing, and I just told them to watch as we stared into the darkened room. It didn't take too long before we watched as the door on the right side of the cupboard, which was behind the door, began to slowly creak open. Naturally, we freaked out. I turned on the lights and watched as the door shut faster than it had opened, and we all ran out. Being kids, we stood at the entrance and laughed for a bit, making jokes while talking about it. We eventually went back inside and continued doing it around 2 to 3 more times, switching off the light, waiting for the door to open, turning it back on, and running out. It was fun for us. However, because I was a really curious child, on the 4th time we did it, I watched a bit longer in order to see if anything else would happen. On that 4th try, after the door opened, I watched, and as everyone else ran out, I stayed put with my finger on the light switch. I watched as a single leg took a step out of the cupboard. Although the room was dark, I could clearly make out the leg and foot for the mere fact that it seemed to be absorbing all the light it came in contact with. Even though it wasn't much, it made the room seem lighter than it actually was. To this day, I've never seen anything as dark as it was, or at the very least, as dark as it appeared to be. I immediately turned the light on and ran out, telling everyone what I'd seen. They were skeptical at first, thinking I was joking. So after a little while, we went back and did it again for a 5th and final time. This time, because of the conversations we were having, my curiosity had shot through the roof. I needed to see how that thing really looked, so we did it all again. We watched the door open and the foot take a step out before they all ran out. Me, on the other hand, well, I stood and watched a bit longer. This time, after watching the foot step out, I watched as a hand gripped the top of the door before using it to pull itself out. As it stood in front of the door, its head and shoulders could be seen above the frame of the door and cupboard itself, meaning it was standing at about 8 or 9 feet tall. I was instantly frozen in place out of fear as my blood ran cold, and I just realized the full scope of what I'd gotten myself into. From where it stood, it slowly turned its head as it looked over at me. Its entire body was so dark that I couldn't see any facial features or anything of the sort. All I could make out was the shape of its body, what had looked like a pair of horns on its forehead, which seemed as if it sat right below the ceiling, as well as what appeared to be eyes. Once it laid its eyes on me, it felt as if it was looking into the furthest depths of my soul. Its eyes shone red within the darkness as all surrounding lights quickly faded away. It was just me and it. Although this lasted only a few short seconds, it felt like time itself had stood still. I was still paralyzed with fear with my hand on the switch as it moved around the door, leaning on it as it began to reach out for me. Although I knew I should have, I couldn't bring myself to move an inch. I watched as it got closer and closer. That's when my cousin saw the hand through the moonlight of the window as it reached for me. So she moved quickly, grabbing my arm and snapping me back to reality, which allowed me to flick the light back on. As the darkness disappeared in an instant, the creature vanished with it, and the cupboard door slammed shut as I ran from the room. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I was panting. Tears rolled down my face. One of my friends went to call my mother, who sent everyone home shortly after. My cousin was the only one who remained to sleep over, even though the others didn't really want to go home. To this day, we have no idea what that creature was. The memory of this event will continue to live rent-free in the minds of those who were present. A third stinker story from RD in Hull. I'm back once more with a more recent encounter with the dogman/werewolf of Hull, Old Stinker. Now, life recently, as I last mentioned, has been, well, rough. Approximately 3.5 months ago, I nearly died, ending up hospitalized with severe pneumonia. I've had recurring problems with my legs, which severely hampered my mobility for the past year as well, though I seem to be on the road to recovery now. So, as I mentioned in my previous tale, I tend to spend a great deal of time chair-bound at my desk, near one of my flat windows with a view of the street. Though I will openly admit my sleeping patterns have vastly improved, under very, very strict doctor's orders and a determination to overcome and get past the dreaded time where I collapsed and had to be rushed to the hospital. As I mentioned, I live on one of the many rows of terraced houses within the city, leading in toward the city center. The house was converted to a number of flats. And at the end of the street is a wooded, overgrown footpath that connects and cuts through to other parts of the city, local parks, and down to the local drain. As you would expect, city life is generally loud. Nights are rarely silent. You get the odd stranger shouting up to a local weed dealer's window at all hours of the day, constantly barking dogs, yowling cats, falling outs in the street. It tends to make a peaceful night's sleep something more of a dream than a reality. The night this happened, a month and a half back, was one such noisy night. I was in my chair, windows cracked open to allow some airflow and circulation through the flat, duvet pulled up around me, when I found myself somewhat irritably waking about 3:30 in the morning. I noticed two distinct things. First, a constant, persistent, and terribly annoying yapping sound echoing through the night from part way down the street. This was from a neighbor's dog. One of those irritating little lap breeds that for some reason they chose to keep in the garden as though it were some Rottweiler or Doberman and would deter burglars or anything slightly larger than an irate pigeon. Yap, 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 all day, all night, like some sort of possessed squeaky toy. Sometimes it does shut up, probably when its owners took it out somewhere with them or went to visit someone with it. The second thing I noticed was a familiar, distinct smell. Or should I say, stench, wafting through the cracked open windows and right into my house, causing me to cough and retch. A stench like rotting flesh mixed with trash. Not the almost musky sewage smell you sometimes get from city drains, not the heavy stink of manure. I was familiar with those. I've lived in this city now a good 20+ years. And prior to that, I lived in rural Welsh countryside, working with our then landlord, who not only maintained a stable yard, but also worked as a farmer. It was great. Free child labor in return for teaching the kid how to ride a horse. So that particular stink was familiar to me as well. No, this was a stench from 20-odd years ago when I was younger. Old Stinker. Now, he'd been in the area, recently, rooting through bins, killing local wildlife, probably using the overgrown wooded footpaths as a convenient way to get about to places where he could find food or prey. And as before, everything seemed to get silent, eerily so, like time stood still, as though everything held its breath. Yap, yap, yap. Well, except for the dog. Nervously, I glanced out the window, leaning forward into it a bit, to glimpse down the road. The streetlights weren't great here. A few were out, a few were covered by trees yet to be trimmed and fully embracing spring. But I felt my heart racing. In this eerily, almost deathly silence, this unnatural moment where the world held its breath, this annoying, stupid little yapping dog seemed to be determined to mock the powers that be themselves. And what I saw caused me to shiver. I saw glimpses of an eerily familiar shaggy black shape, loping along the street, investigating bins left out, nosing through the trash. And it was getting closer. I turned my living room light off, holding my breath, not wanting to draw its attention. The last thing I wanted was for it to look up with those same amber eyes, the same pointed ears, and be like, You, the one that got away. No thank you. Definitely not. I'll not toy with fate like that so close to very nearly dying scant months prior. But as Stinker worked his way down the street, the yapping dog intensified. And then I heard it starting to growl. It was like that tiny little thing was about to challenge the Stinker. It would be madness, or a sign of a hyper-aggressive lap breed, which probably was just as feasible. And soon enough, the growling was echoing in the night air. As the Stinker stopped outside the yapper's garden, I watched in silent horror as I saw it stop. Then it rose up, its stance going from that lazy, scrounging canine lope almost to some sort of defiant, challenging stance. If I were to describe it, you know that not quite ape, not quite human stance Caesar takes in the new Planet of the Apes movie, where he just towers over his opponent and squares right up to them. It was kind of like that. The yapper barked, growling, snarling, pathetic noises for its size. And what ensued? Well, I've heard dogs fight. I've heard cats fight. It happens with ferals and strays. Normally, you hear the barks, the growls, one becomes louder and another becomes a yelp, then a clatter as they scatter and split. But this was not like that. The yapper's tiny, pathetic noises of aggression were met with a deeper, more bestial, rumbling growl and snarl. And then there was a sickening snap and crunch, and the yapping stopped. It stopped cold. My stomach lurched. I felt the tiny swig of Pepsi I had a few hours prior, with some painkillers, coming back up with bile, threatening to spill into my mouth. And I watched in cold silence as the shadowy form of Stinker turned and began to lope back toward the end of the road. However, this time it seemed to be on 3 limbs rather than 4. I didn't need to guess what it was carrying with it now. I remained silent for a good hour after that, just watching the night. I hadn't realized I'd been awake through the dreaded half hour, where I remember the moments that led to my collapse and the ambulance rushing me off to the hospital. I was in a bit of shock. I dare not say anything to the neighbors down the street. I mean, what could I say? Their beloved little dog was snatched up by an 8-foot-tall dog man. I would have tried to stop it, but I did not fancy my hobbling on a cane against it. No, instead I guiltily watched as posters went up, and other neighbors breathed sighs of relief for the yapping finally coming to an end. But after seeing what happened, I will admit, I have a bit of concern for the pot guy who comes across most days and nights to shout up at his dealer's windows for more. I am truly scared. From NG Loves Spooky. At the beginning of this year, I, a 24-year-old female, went through the long and exhausting process of moving houses. I had finally moved out of my apartment and into my grandmother's old home, which she had kindly rented to me. The house was nice. It was a single flat with 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, and a nice living room with a wood stove. It also had an attic, a crawl space, which is where this all takes place, and a big background for my 2 beautiful Rotties, Mary and Elka. Unlike how Rottweilers are portrayed, they aren't actually as aggressive as other aggressive dog breeds. In fact, Elka was a big goofball who wanted to befriend everyone and everything. And Mary was a scaredy cat who liked to cower behind Elka until Mary decided it was safe. The first few weeks I moved in, everyone was fine. It was on the 3rd or 4th week when it started. It was late one night, a Wednesday or a Thursday, I believe. I was watching some Netflix show on my laptop, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Mary and Elka were lying further down on my bed. I remember it was getting late. In fact, 11 p.m. was the latest I'd ever been up in that house. But still, I wanted to watch just one more episode. I'm sure we've all been guilty of that. A new episode had started, and this strange scratching sound came with it. I waited for one of the characters to explain the sound, but they never did. I decided to pause the show to make sure it really was the show. Turns out, it wasn't. That scratching sound continued. But I needed to go to the bathroom. I thought that since I was up already, I'd go check out the sound anyway. I did my business, then walked around the house, trying to hear where the sound was loudest. It took me to the corner of the living room. The sound was like someone was scratching the wood floorboards from underneath. I didn't really feel scared yet, more intrigued, if anything. So I decided to do something stupid. I stomped my foot on the spot where the sound seemed to be coming from. I don't really know what I was expecting, but to my surprise, the sound stopped. Satisfied, I walked back to my room, but not before hearing a low growl. This was hard to explain. It sounded like gurgling, like a dog was growling with water in its mouth. It was strange, but I didn't give it much thought. I fell asleep soon after that. Fast forward until 2 nights ago. As of writing this, I was having a movie night with one of my mates. Let's call him Devin. We were watching Red Notice, when at 11 p.m., like clockwork, the scratching started again. Devin and I began to discuss what it could be. I even informed him about the previous occurrence. I went over to the same corner and I stomped on it again. And once more, it stopped. But this time, only for a little while. About 30 to 45 minutes later, the scratching started up again. At this point, I was getting frustrated. I remember telling Devin that it must be a possum, maybe some rodent of some sort, in the crawl space. Devin offered to go check it out. I, however, declined. Still, he insisted. It took a while, but finally I gave in. As long as he took a firearm for safety, I thought. So we were out there under the cold night sky at the side of the house, with a torch, a firearm, and the keys to the crawl space. Devin opened the door, and I shuddered. You see, I hate small spaces. I wanted Devin to chicken out and just go back inside, but he didn't, and he began to crawl in. I waited for what felt like forever, probably the longest 3 or so minutes of my life. I stood there shivering in the cold in just the sensor light, with my misty breath, half expecting Devin to scream or get his face ripped off by some wild animal. But that didn't happen either. In fact, it was dead silent. I knelt down to look into the crawl space. Devin? My shivering voice called into the musty void. I couldn't see him in there. He was too far in. Devin! I called a little louder. No response. A few more minutes went past with the thought of calling the police in my head, when finally I heard a shuffling noise. And then I saw Devin's butt shuffling out of the opening. He was crawling backward out of the crawl space, and I smiled. Thank God. I thought he must have... We have to go, Devin interrupted. He was holding my wrist so tightly now that it almost hurt, and the look of fear in his eyes scared me badly. I think I was more scared than he was. Devin was tough. I had never seen him like this. Not in a long, long time, at least. I tried talking to him, but he started to drag me towards his car. Devin, what's wrong? You're scaring me really bad. Devin would not respond. Instead, he just repeated, We've gotta go. We've gotta go. He opened the door and set me in the car, then opened up the back door. Mary, Elka, come on! He called to the dogs. A moment later, Mary and Elka came barreling out of the house and into his back seat. He got in the driver's seat, locked all the doors, and floored it. I remember pleading with Devin on the verge of tears, begging him to tell me what he saw. I'd never seen him like this, and his actions scared me more than what he'd said. Devin drove to his house and parked in the driveway and stared into space. "Devin, what happened?" I asked one more time. Devin looked at me with a serious look. He stared into my eyes and said in a calm yet somehow terrified tone, "Haley, whatever that was scratching underneath the house, it's not a rodent." He looked out the driver's window, and I could see he was fighting back tears. Oh God, it had pale skin and long fingers that were made entirely of fingernails, and it had like a baby look to it. But it was the size of me. Does that even make sense? And his face, that was the worst part. His voice and body started to tremble, but I could see he was trying his best to stay strong. It had no face, just fleshy skin, and where you'd think its eyes were. He swallowed and looked back at me. There were just these gaping black holes. It came right at me. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to tell Devin that was a good one, that it was the best prank he'd ever played on me. But I couldn't see it. His eyes were filled with so much fear, and his tone was quite serious. I could tell this wasn't a joke. That night, we stayed in the car. I think I eventually fell asleep, but I know Devin didn't. I've been sleeping on Devin's couch ever since. I know that he saw something real. He's not the kind to joke like that, even though I'd wished he was. And he definitely wouldn't put that much emotion into it. If it was a joke, heck, that man deserves an Oscar. I've been slowly moving my things into my grandma's present house, but I only get my stuff in the daytime. I don't go back to my house at night, and I definitely won't go back after 11 p.m. Shadow Creature from Chira. I'm a 41-year-old woman from Finland. Over these 4 decades, I've had multiple weird paranormal experiences, which I'd like to share with you. I want to give hope to people out there who may have experienced something similar. You're not crazy, you're not imagining things, and most of all, you are not alone with your experiences. I desire no spotlights, no compensation for these. This happened to me in my mid-20s, when I was studying art. I've always drawn ever since I was able to hold a pen, so being admitted into an art school was a small dream come true. I loved my studies, and going to school every day was a delight. I was also healthy at the time and rarely sick. The worst issues I had with my health were period pains, but this one school morning I woke up feeling really croaky and sick. Thinking that I just hadn't gotten enough sleep, as I did have a bad habit of staying up late even when I needed to wake up at 6:30 a.m. to get to school by 8, I got up from bed and readied myself for the school day. I brushed my teeth, groomed myself, ate, and left for the bus station to catch my ride. The mornings during winter in North Europe are both cold and extremely dark, so it's easy to feel sleepy. It's actually a medically acknowledged condition here up north that people are tired and have harder time staying awake when you see a dim excuse of sunlight for just 4 hours each day. However, I was more tired than usual. I left my home at 7 a.m. The bus station was just a 3-minute walk away from my home, but after a minute of walking, I decided that I needed a break. I was going to stay home, sleep as much as I could, and see if I just felt better tomorrow. If I did, I could go to school and miss just one day. And if I really was facing a rare case of catching a virus or something, then I would know it by tomorrow and act accordingly. I turned on my heels and dragged my feet through the snow back to my cozy apartment. I didn't take any medicine because I planned to catch some sleep first, and if I was still feeling under the weather after waking up, I would take something. So I undressed myself and slipped under my duvet. My bed was pushed into an alcove, which was located just behind my built-in closet for jackets and shoes. Next to the closet was my front door. I always slept on my bed facing towards the wall which led to my front door. Think about an L-shaped space where the long side of the L is my alcove, and the short part of the L is the wall, and behind it is the space for the closet. The front door is at the tip of the short side of the letter L. Unlike what I expected, I could not fall asleep. I was lying on my stomach, eyes closed, listening to how someone from the same apartment complex was walking in the staircase, clearly leaving for their own work for the day. The room was dimly lit from the streetlights shining through my curtains. It's a bit better to be in a city during the winter than in the countryside, where you can't even see your own hand during the darkest times of winter. Trust me, I grew up in a rural forest near the Russian border. It's as dark as in the monsters behind, as we say here. While listening to my neighbor minding their own business in the staircase of this apartment complex, I suddenly heard my front door lock opening. It was 7 a.m. on a weekday. No one should be coming in. I hadn't called for maintenance, and even in the case of needing maintenance, they always called ahead and agreed upon a time when they could come to visit and fix the problem. I could still hear the front door lock opening and the door being slowly opened. At first, I thought that maybe it was my landlord, as he surely must have had a spare key to my apartment. But as quickly as I had that idea, it was shot down. During all these years I lived in that apartment, I had not heard a single wheeze from my landlord. He wouldn't be here. No one else except my mother, who lived 45 minutes away, had a spare key. Excited to think that it was my mom, and maybe she had stopped by to ask me if I wanted to go shopping with her in a nearby big city from this small town, I turned on my stomach. If it was my mom asking me to go with her, I would go, even half dead, as getting a chance to go shopping and have a car drive was a rare luxury to someone without a license. As I turned and waited for my mom to walk in, I saw in the dim light of my room a black head peeking behind the wall at the end of my bed. Happy that someone was there, and certain it was my mother still, I tried to open my mouth to let her know I was awake and she could turn the light on. The switch was on her left anyway, no need to tiptoe around. But I couldn't speak. Nothing came out of my mouth, not even a small wheeze. I kept staring at this person, and the longer I looked, the less human it began to look. It was solid black and really, really tall. My mom's ceiling was about 3 meters high, about 10 feet, and this creature wouldn't have been able to stand upright. I think it must have been close to 4 meters, or 13 feet. It was hunched over with a long neck, fingers curled around the edge of the wall at my bed's end, while its neck was pushed further into my apartment from the mudroom. It was looking forward, like scanning the area. It was moving very slowly and carefully, appearing almost shy or timid. Half of its body emerged from behind the small wall, and I could see that its limbs were unnaturally long for its body. The body itself was thin and lean, and it looked human. It didn't have any facial features, though. No ears or nose or eyes or mouth. I think the best way to describe it was to imagine a solid black version of Slender Man, with no clothes and no features, and with long fingers. I must say, this happened 2 years before creepypasta came up with Slender Man lore, so I was not influenced by that. What I was seeing was no twisted, imaginative version of Slender Man, rather an entity of its own. Nor was this a shadow person, because it was way too solid to be an apparition or a ghost, which shadow people typically are. I was still somehow thinking this was my mother. It had to be. I'm not sure why, perhaps because the feeling I got from this creature was somehow warm and friendly. Just like when you look at little birds and feel them being friendly towards you. I was feeling the same thing when I saw this creature. I tried to say it was okay to turn on the lights, that I was awake, but I was still unable to speak. The creature emerged fully from behind the wall, and suddenly, it spotted me. We faced one another, eyes locked, even when it didn't have any eyes. Just this black mass. I was able to hum a bit at this point, but still, no words came out. The creature kept its attention locked on me, while it started to slowly move closer. When we first noticed each other, the distance between us had to be no more than 2 meters, maybe 6.5 feet. It kept getting closer to me, with the same very slow, soft, almost calculated movement. As it approached, its face drew nearer as it hunched over, seemingly curious. Finally, it stood right next to my head at the bedside, peering down at my face, creeping only a few inches away from me. It was like a mother peering down at their little baby in their crib. Still, I could make out no features, just this black mass shape of a human head. But I still could tell it was friendly and curious. Finally, a little wheeze came from my lips, and my eyes shot open. I don't know how my eyes were closed, because I had never fallen asleep. I knew that. But somehow, when my eyes fully opened, this creature disappeared too. It was gone like it had never been there. Later, I told my sister and brother about this encounter, as they knew I don't make these things up, and they've had their own share of experiences. When I described the creature, my sister said that she too had seen it, but outside. She had seen it running alongside a car when she was in her teens and returning back from school in a school taxi. It ran from one shadow to another, emerging into the shadow almost like diving into it, then bounced out from the shadow to appear on the sunny patches in the forest along the country road the car was driving on. It kept up with the car's speed with ease and ran along for a long while. I never asked for details, but I got an impression from my sister's words that the creature was running on all fours, or maybe bounding on all fours, like a big feline would run by leaping. She said that no one else saw it. My brother also confessed to seeing this same-looking creature in his childhood. He had walked past our living room window and noticed something on a birch tree in our yard, just outside. There sat this solid black thing with no facial features, no eyes, and unnaturally long limbs. It was squatting on one of the tree branches. Fast forward to the year 2016 or similar. My sister and I like to watch paranormal documentaries, and whenever we meet each other, we'll spend time with these shows. In one documentary, there was a story of a man who had an uninvited spirit in his basement, causing him all sorts of frights and nuisance. He said that he was able to capture it in a photo, which made him happy because he had some solid evidence now in his hands. The photo was shown on that specific program. When my sister and I saw it on the TV screen, we froze. In that photo, there was the same black figure with no features, long limbs, as we both had seen on our own occasions. Without a word, we turned to look at each other, knowingly, saying almost in unison, "That's it. That's the creature." The Thing in the Fog, from TheDruid. I'm from Dublin, Ireland, and in South Dublin, we have a local park called Corcog Park. The park itself is quite old, and it was originally an estate, dating back as far as the 13th century. It was originally known as Corcog de Mesnay. There's quite a bit of historical information available online about the complete history of the area, which is quite interesting, but I'll only include what I think is relevant to the story. Back in the early 18th century, there was a gunpowder mill in the park, which exploded, leaving a number of workers dead and many more injured. The stories tell that the explosions were so immense, it was felt roughly 11 kilometers, or 6 miles, away. This has led to the belief that the park itself is haunted, and spending time in the park at night can bring an eerie, uncomfortable feeling over you, whether you believe or not. Just across from where the old gunpowder mill was located is the remnants of the home to the steward of Corcog. The steward was responsible for the day-to-day running of Corcog de Mesnay, and the house itself was occupied until the 1970s. For as long as I can remember, this area where the house used to be has been the center point for really creepy experiences and is less formally known as the Devil's Passage. On the land where the house was situated, there is a large garden. It's said that the devil once walked through this garden, and the path he walked made the trees bend and meet together at the top. They're still like that to this day. Now that you have some background on the area, let's get into the story. Back in the summer of 2008, me and a couple of friends were hanging out in the park after spending the day playing some football, or soccer for my American friends. We were all around 17 or 18 years old at the time, so we were pretty fearless. Or so we thought we were. Being in the park after dark didn't really scare us. It was around 11 p.m., and while we had been there most of the evening, one of our other friends, I'll call him E, had only just arrived. After a few minutes, E mentioned that he wasn't feeling so well, and before this point we all started to notice that something didn't feel right, and that the park had gone completely quiet. Suddenly, E collapses to the ground and starts having some sort of a fit, and he was struggling to breathe. At 17, we didn't really know what to do, and we thought maybe he had fainted or was playing a prank on us. To see if he was messing with us, I decided to pinch his triceps. Anyone who has ever had this done to them knows it's quite painful, and it's not something you can ignore. But he didn't even flinch. We were trying to decide whether we should carry E out of the park or just try to wake him up. But then, all of a sudden, we noticed a fog starting to drop. But this was only dropping across the field from us, where the Devil's Passage was. My other friend, M, was just standing and staring towards the fog, which was really creepy. M was really into the supernatural and paranormal, and would never hesitate to go somewhere creepy if he thought he might experience something. But this was the first time I ever saw him scared and uneasy. I knew he was looking at the fog for a reason, and when I went over to him, all he said to me was, "Look towards where the entrance to the passage is, to the left of the wall." When I looked over, I saw something that I still, to this day, cannot explain. There were these two bright red eyes looking back at us from within the fog. I wanted to look away, but I simply couldn't. I was fixated on whatever this thing was. After a few minutes, the eyes disappeared, but as they did, we could see a large shadow moving through the fog and back behind the walls of the passage. It was at this moment I thought, nope, and decided we were leaving. Me, M, and one of our other friends helped carry E out of the park. He had since woke back up, but was very much out of it. The further away from that area we got, the more that feeling of dread began to go away. We were just outside of the park when we realized the fog was gone too. Everyone went home except me and M. We stayed outside my house for a while, trying to figure out what had happened, but we were just in shock. The next day, we all met up to speak about it, and Dee had no idea that this had happened. He remembers feeling sick, and after that, all he remembers is walking home. Up until this happened, I thought the idea of the paranormal was quite interesting, but I didn't really believe in ghosts, nor demons or the devil. But this, well, this completely changed my perspective. I still go into the park from time to time, but would only ever consider going to the Devil's Passage again during the day. Something in the Woods of Pennsylvania. From WildmanTim. I've been debating whether to share this story for a while now, but after reading some other experiences, I feel like I need to get this off my chest. This happened to me and my girlfriend, Kate, about 2 years back, when we were camping in the Allegheny Mountains in Pennsylvania. We decided to take a long weekend to get away from the city, do some hiking and just enjoy nature together. We'd found a pretty remote campsite nestled in a valley by a small creek. The first day and night went by without incident. We set up our tent, cooked some food over the campfire, and just relaxed. The second night, things got weird. It was around 2 a.m. and we were both sound asleep when we were awakened by this strange noise outside the tent. It sounded like heavy breathing, but not that of a person. It was too deep, too guttural. At first, we tried to convince ourselves it was just a deer, or something like that. But then we heard the footsteps. They were heavy, and they seemed to be circling our tent. Kate grabbed my arm, eyes wide with fear. I tried to reassure her, but I was freaking out too. I slowly reached for the zipper of the tent, trying to be as quiet as possible. I peered into the darkness, and that's when I saw it. Something was standing at the edge of our campsite, partially obscured by trees. That thing was huge, easily over 7 feet tall, and at first it did look like a man, but not quite. Its shoulders were too broad, its arms too long, and its face, well, it looked like a wolf, but it was standing upright like a man. I must have made a noise because it suddenly snapped its head right to my direction. Its eyes seemed to glow in the moonlight. I swear I saw some sort of intelligence in them, a kind of feral cunning. I zipped the tent back up as quickly and quietly as I could, my heart hammering in my chest. Kate and I just sat there, clutching each other, hardly daring to breathe. We then heard it moving around outside, approaching the tent, before suddenly going quiet. We waited. I'm not sure we even breathed then. All at once, it happened. With a snarl and a rip, a snout tore into the side of our tent. We screamed. Kate desperately tried to crawl backwards, but we were trapped in our own tent. That thing snarled and chewed until the entire wall of our tent had been ripped out. I cried out and kicked at the same time. I felt my foot hit something hard. There was a yelp, and then footsteps running away. It was gone. We stayed still, not moving, not sleeping. As soon as dawn broke, we packed up our things and got the heck out of Dodge. We reported the event to the park rangers, but they gave us funny looks and said it must have been a bear. But that was no bear. No coyote, no wolf either. Since this event, I've shared my story with folks, online and in person. Turns out, there have been other sightings of something similar in those woods. I don't really know what it was, but I do know that we were lucky to walk away alive. If my kick had not been enough to scare it off, I honestly think we'd be dead. Not so skeptical anymore. From Druid Folk. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural. I've never really believed in ghosts or demons or cryptids. But an experience I had last summer in the Olympic National Forest has made me question everything. My buddy Jake and I are avid hikers. We've tackled trails all over the country, but we'd never been to the Pacific Northwest. We decided to take on the Hoh River Trail, a beautiful but challenging hike through the heart of the Olympic rainforest. We set out early on the second day of our hike, aiming to reach the Blue Glacier by nightfall. The trail was far tougher than we anticipated, and by mid-afternoon we were exhausted. We decided to take a break near a stream a little ways off the main trail. As we were refilling our water bottles, Jake suddenly grabbed my arm. "Dude, look," he whispered, pointing across the stream. There, partially hidden by the dense foliage, was a massive humanoid figure covered in dark fur. At first, I assumed it was a bear, but as it moved, I realized it walked on and stayed on 2 legs. And oh god, that thing had to be at least 8 feet tall. It had broad shoulders and long, muscular arms. Its face was hidden by the shadows, but I knew it was watching us. Jake and I stood there, frozen in shock. The creature then took a step towards us, then another. It let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through my body. I think that broke our paralysis, because right after we turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush back towards the trail. But to my horror, that thing came after us. I could hear it behind us, branches snapping under its weight, heavy breathing getting closer. It was much faster than us, easily traveling through the foliage. At one point, I risked a glance over my shoulder and nearly stumbled in my terror. It was practically right behind us, eyes glinting, like it was ready to make a kill. Jake was a few steps ahead of me. He burst out onto the trail, and I followed, my lungs burning, my legs pumping. We ran like we'd never run before, fueled by pure adrenaline and primal fear. After ages, we couldn't hear it behind us anymore. We collapsed on the trail, gasping for air, bodies trembling. We looked at one another. There was an unspoken question hanging between us. What the heck was that? Later on, after we made it back to civilization, we discussed what we'd seen together, to make sure our accounts were similar. That way we could rule out one of us hallucinating for whatever reason. But there was no problem there. What we saw was real, and the experience was shared between us. I wish I could forget what I saw, but I don't think I'll be able to. Nowadays, whenever I take a step outdoors, I think about it and wonder if something else big, powerful, and fast is watching me, about to chase me through the woods. Next time, I may not make it out alive. Thank you for tuning in to Unexplained Encounters. If you're not already, follow and listen to Unexplained Encounters on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Leave us a rating while you're at it. Get some cool creepy merch at eeriecast.store. Check out my other show where I narrate scary work stories. It's called Tales from the Break Room. For more terrifyingly entertaining shows from EerieCast, go to eeriecast.com. And if you want to listen to Unexplained Encounters and all the other EerieCast shows without pesky ads, sign up for EerieCast Plus at eeriecast.com/plus. You'll also get exclusive access to horror audiobooks only available to EerieCast Plus members. And you'll get 20% off our EerieCast.store merch through our members-only monthly discount code. Finally, if you have a scary story of the unexplained, send it to me at darkstories.org. I think that's about it. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.